You got the Nauvoo neighbor describing these bad things that Chauncey Higbee is doing. Chauncey Higbee is leading that new church. So this guy is like trying to talk about all these, accusing Joseph Smith of being a narcissist, and oh, but these men that started this church, he was just trying to steal their wives. And that just wasn't true. And so you really have to go into... So here is one example in the Joseph Smith papers. This is 1845, so Joseph Smith died June 27th, 1844, where some of Joseph Smith's apostles start talking about spiritual wifery, how evil it is, accusing certain people of that, and these same men never once spoke ill of Joseph Smith and said that he lived spiritual wifery. I would think if Joseph Smith did live spiritual wifery, some of his apostles that speak out so harshly against spiritual wifery would have slipped, but they don't. And so this is Parley P. Pratt speaking, and then they do talk about Law and Foster will never get out of hell until Joseph Smith unlocks it for them. They're just saying they're very evil. And then it goes right into talking about spiritual wifery. So again, if you think that I'm not going to read this whole thing, it was such a good guy because he didn't like plural marriage, but he's a good guy that he, that's, I don't know. It's just, this is what Helen Mark Kimball talked about, is that people were they didn't condemn adultery as hard as they condemn plural marriage. Whereas adultery, a man has a woman that he doesn't, especially back then, she really was trash. They didn't value, and that's what spiritual wifery was, okay? And then if you scroll down here, it really gets into that. And then I'll quote a little bit of what Parley P. Pratt says, which is why we don't believe Joseph Smith lived spiritual wifery. Did he have eternity-only sealings? I'll go into that in a second here. But they start, Sidney Rigdon was excommunicated, and they said they're all working against us, sealing women to one another, running into adultery, using that word. But Parley P. Pratt is a polygamist. He's living plural marriage. They never used the word plural marriage. They would always correct people to say celestial marriage. So M.S. Smith saying we're not polygamists, they all were one with that. They just didn't believe that was the same thing of what they were living, but they were living plural marriage. Running into adultery, then he accuses Sidney Rigdon of getting into spiritual wifery. And if I scroll down here, I don't know how strong of evidence there is, or why. Apparently, some people doubt Parley P. Pratt, but William Law and others, they denounce plural marriage, and even here it doesn't hint. But when I read so many other things, I don't think there's... Joseph Smith and many others did say William Law was an adulterer, though. And so, as we scroll down here, you get what Parley P. Pratt explains, wrote that there was no such doctrine held or practice as a principle of the Latter-day Saints. If a man has a wife according to the law of God and the regulations of the church, she's his real wife, body, soul, heart, and hand, and not his spiritual wife. Because those were temporary marriages, kind of like the Middle East, where they just get rid of the women after their temporary marriage. But I think this was even shorter. Anyway, similarly, the husband in such a relationship is her real husband to provide for his wife and children, be the head of the father, their head and the father, and bring them up in fear and love and truth of God, as Abraham, Isaac, and of old did. Pratt also affirmed that sealings and covenants secure the union of parents and children, And it just goes on. You can read the whole thing, but it's very powerful that why has he never accused Joseph Smith of living spiritual wifery if he did? He doesn't. And they did fight. Meg Stout talks about how Brigham Young fought spiritual wifery in Utah. And apparently Vivian Jackie said some of those men did end up in Utah. And I think that's how you've got some of the FLDS and a lot of these polygamous groups today. They don't live it like Parley P. Pratt and Joseph Smith did, because they talk about having spiritual wives and they really mean it. Okay. They do abuse children and women, and it's very bad. But where it is confusing when you get into some of these records, Ugo Perego starts, trying to nail down certain records, and most of these are women that had eternity only sealings. And so there's one video, I'm going to give a link here of this video of Josephine Lyon, where they did check the DNA of Sylvia Sessions Lyon, and I think they checked it a few times, because she was the only one that really sounded like me, because they tested everyone, even Miranda Hyde, she only had children with Orson Hyde, just all of these alleged children that they think Joseph Smith could have fathered, and it turns out no, that the people that are descended of Josephine, who's the daughter of Sylvia Sessions Lyon, that she really was the daughter of the legal husband of Sylvia Sessions Lyon, who had been excommunicated, wasn't in the church anymore, and thus, she wanted to have exaltation of the next life, so she got sealed to Joseph Smith for eternity only, but that's not spiritual wifery at all, and it's not polyamory, because in the next life, she's not going to be married to her time husband anymore. So it's confusing, but members of the church, there's a reason why you got 11 million members that are like, oh, no, yeah, he didn't do that, It is confusing. Understanding what happened in 1842. And so you've got Orson Pratt. I'll just start with him. He was excommunicated because he believed J.C. Bennett, who did basically take Sarah Pratt as like his spiritual wife. They weren't married. They weren't committed. She was married. J.C. Bennett had left his wife. And even in the papers, Joseph Smith papers, Hiram Smith, we have the letters. They get a letter from J.C. Bennett's wife saying, oh, he's still married. He's a mean, mean man. And Hiram Smith goes and meets her and talks to her and decides, I think she's telling the truth. And so Joseph Smith won't let him court. He's trying to court someone. He won't let J.C. Bennett court anyone or marry. And so then he goes and has an affair with Sarah Pratt. Her husband comes home. She's excommunicated, not getting help from the church. And it's so interesting, this whole story. And then you read J.C. Bennett's book, and then you understand all these words mean and what he actually did. It's so crazy. But, J.C. Bennett was a short man. He was like 5 foot. And Joseph Smith described him as having a very whiny voice. And then he just always talks about Joseph Smith just being this Don Juan, big guy. So here's Joseph Smith, like 6'4", and then it's so interesting when you learn all these details about these people. But he just did not marry any of his apostles' wives. That did not happen. Were there some eternity only sealings? Yes. But the whole story, there's a story of the 12 that Heber C. Kimball told, that is being told by his son-in-law. And so best I could find was a link to that I can give. And Heber C. Kimball was like shaking and crying. And he says, oh, I want to marry your wife. And he said that to all the 12. He said, I want to marry the wife. But when they came, Horace Whitney explains, and he's crying. He's like, okay, here's my wife. Joseph says, I'm not going to marry your wife. I'm just going to seal you. So they got sealed for time and all eternity, or for just eternity, kind of like today. If you're already married to someone for time, you got like a civil marriage. A lot of times people go to the temple and just to get sealed for eternity. Okay. And that's for the next life. So he seals them all for time and for all eternity. William Law didn't get that sealing because he had, according to Joseph Smith, was living adultery. So he actually had no problem being with other women. He just didn't like polygamy, which meant you were committed and you let the babies live. But anyway, these apostles did that. And then I read this interesting theory by a different scholar, church historian, who was just trying to understand what was going on. So as you understand the timeline, it was really like 1843 that all these sealings were happening in real marriages. 1842 is when Orson Pratt comes home from England, and almost all of these apostles are off on England. Coming back, he's first told by Joseph Smith, hey, your wife cheated on you. Yeah, it didn't take too long for him to figure, but before he figured things out, he believed them. He believed his wife, who said, oh, no, I didn't do anything with J.C. Bennett, And so he's just thinking Joseph Smith is like stole his wife while he's on his mission. And then he gets excommunicated just because he will not sustain Joseph Smith in a meeting. And so they're asking him to sustain, and he's like, nope. I don't know what's going on here. So here on the Joseph Smith papers, we see Orson Pratt, who I just mentioned, that he was a little bit younger than Joseph Smith. So he was really young when he joined the church. So the church was basically his whole life. What happened here why he was sort of freaking out, and essentially, I'll just read through all of this, that he was missing, and he wrote a letter to his wife that they all interpreted as him sounding like he was going to kill himself. And you scroll down here, it really sounds like he just didn't know who had tried to seduce his wife, Sarah Pratt. Was it John C. Bennett or was it Joseph Smith? And Joseph Smith was talking, they're worried that he would lay violent hands on himself and try to kill himself. And if you just scroll down here, you'll see a lot more details. So here we see the whole story that Sarah Pratt was involved with J.C. Bennett. And I've read a lot of things. There were a lot of people who saw them physically together with a child just sitting on the floor, because her husband was on a mission for 2 years when she did this, and she didn't live alone. She had people lived in other rooms and had walked in on them, basically. So there are a lot of witnesses that it was J.C. Bennett, who he was the real one that did something bad. But more that I read about her, and I just sort of had a dream, and I think it was about her that she just really but Joseph Smith caught them, and so there were witnesses that he was yelling at her, cussing her out and stuff, or just saying really harsh things to Sarah. And then she didn't have church funds anymore, but it seems like he possibly walked in. So what they're referencing here is, so this is July 15th of July 1842, and John C. Bennett's just trying to ruin Joseph Smith's life, and so he's accusing him here on page 228 that Joseph Smith, and a lot of people that, especially Baptists, they use tithing money to talk about this, that Joseph Smith confidentially told him he wanted Sarah Pratt as his spiritual wife, but it's believed that it was Pratt. It was J.C. Bennett that was going around, and he's the one that got Sarah as his sort of spiritual wife. And I think a ridiculous story, but if you go up here, he's just, you can tell how angry he is at Emma Smith, which is funny. Like, I just really laughed when I read this. I mean, it might not be funny to anyone else, but since I've studied all this, and especially Meg Stout's book and everything, you just really understand a lot more of these details. She goes into the High Council minutes. I'm choosing not to go into the horrible details of everything bad that Bennett and Chauncey Higby did. And if you go up here and click just Chauncey Higby, like, he's 20 years old, and he's his right-hand man, this 20-year-old, and this guy's 40, almost 40 years old, J.C. Bennett. It's just weird. He's like, well, Mrs. Pratt was highly educated. She was beautiful. She was beautiful, charming, and he's just really going on. You know that he's something. Oh, and then Emma's just, and then in the book, he just tries to say that, he says that the Relief Society we're prostituting women, but if you go to the Joseph Smith papers, the Relief Society minutes, it was about restoring virtue. Yeah, and so essentially they talk about his letter. He says, I'm a ruined man. My future prospects are blasted. The testimony on both sides seems to be equal. Was it Joseph saying the same things, that Bennett's saying the same things, and his wife took Bennett's side, but his wife did cheat with Bennett. There were witnesses. In the one direction or the other. How to decide, I know not. Either way, my temporal happiness is gone in this world. If these testimonies of my wife and others are true, then I have been deceived for 12 years, and my hopes are blasted and gone, as it were, in a moment. My long toils and labors. Like he literally was a very poor man that got in a boat and went to England for 2 years and preached the gospel. So he went through a lot. He did toil through a lot for the church. He just, leaving his, wife who just had a baby for 2 years. If I, on the other hand, and the other testimonies are true, that my family are ruined forever. And so they were really thought he was going to kill himself, unfortunately. But I think the fact that his story goes on, he was excommunicated, and it was found that Joseph was, a lot of scholars have talked about this, and I'm not going to go into details of that, but that Joseph Smith was very angry, and that the 12, when Joseph Smith was in hiding, excommunicated Orson Pratt. Okay. But as you see, he was very quickly rebaptized in January 1843, and he's a member of the Quorum of the 12. So clearly, he knew there were witnesses and that it was Bennett. He stayed with his wife. They had a bunch of kids. And then they divorced, and she became an anti-Mormon. She called herself an anti-Mormon, but yeah, and so he went to Utah and everything, and he did live polygamy and plural marriage, but you never see that, but for a moment he believed maybe Joseph had, but he was convinced enough that Joseph hadn't, and that he went back to the church. And clearly Joseph Smith was very angry that the 12 didn't understand this man who almost killed himself's mental state. So he, it was a little manipulative, but I think he was an empath and really cared about Orson. And so thus telling all the other 12, just months later, oh, I want your wife. It was like retribution in his mind to let them feel what this man who was about to kill himself felt, because he believed Bennett for a second. He didn't know. He was confused. But, because his wife did support Bennett, obviously. Yeah. Anyway, there's that story. He believes his wife. He wants to believe his wife. Joseph Smith is in hiding at this point because it's just a lot's happened. J.C. Bennett has gone and accused him of trying to shoot Governor Boggs, who it doesn't even kill him, but just being shot at. They're trying to get Joseph Smith extradited to Missouri, but then, they totally get rid of that and prove that he didn't do anything. He didn't. But he's in hiding, and so he did not approve Orson Pratt being excommunicated. And so a lot of scholars have said he was very, very mad about that. And so I think this theory makes sense to me, that he's still mad that they don't have compassion for Orson Pratt for not sustaining Joseph Smith because he believes that he tried to steal his wife. So then he takes those 12 and says, I want to marry your wife. Go ahead and just give her to me. To all of them. And they're all crying, and just, they understood, because how it's described, Orson Pratt was just like, it sounded like he was about to kill himself in 1842. He was very depressed. But what's the end story with Orson Pratt, though? Joseph Smith loved him, cared about him. I don't think he's a narcissist. I think he was a very compassionate person. I think for him to understand the boundary of Emily Partridge, be like, okay, you want me to stop talking? I will stop talking. I will leave. Like, I've grown up with a narcissist, a very abusive narcissist. Boundaries are nothing. Me asking them to be quiet, stop talking, that's not happening. I hardly know what that is. I know what a narcissist is. So as far as reading these accounts of Joseph Smith interacting with these people, I believe that he's an empath. I hear a lot of stories of him just crying as he's talking to people. You know, he loved his family, came from a huge family. You know, there's just so many different stories if you read all these books. He was just so bonded and always giving money and helping out his whole family. And if you read Lucy Maximus' dictated book, I don't see any signs of him being a narcissist. Could he get angry? Did he get angry at Walker Kimball? He threw something at him. Yeah, because his kid was like, he made me feel icky. You know, and that's the only situation where I thought, whoa, he's like really mad. But I think he was, our church does not defend pedophiles. How our church is set up, it protects against that, because pedophiles do what they do and are successful because they choose vocations that are with children. If you remember the Church of Christ Latter-day Saints, you're not paid to be a Sunday school teacher. You're not paid to be over the teenagers or to work with kids. With as far as the church goes and being on church grounds, it's all volunteer. You're called to do that. So you can't go to school and study. Bishops have not gone to school. There are bishops that lead a whole ward that have never gone to seminary. You know, there is much less opportunity, and I think we can thank Joseph Smith for that, because that's when that started, is just calling people to these callings. Could someone sometimes not realize? Joseph Smith didn't realize J.C. Bennett was a sexual predator, and he was as bad as Jeffrey Epstein. But the fact that he found out within a year really quick and was like, nope, nope, nope. And whatever he said to J.C. Bennett was really harsh enough that J.C. Bennett tried to kill himself. So no, I don't think Joseph Smith was okay with men who really did treat women badly. He wasn't okay with that at all. Anyway, I'm just gonna end that there. That's what I think about him. I do think there isn't a story of a woman being proposed to live polygamy that wasn't like, that sounds awful. No, like none of them were like, yay, I want to do this. But I think with Joseph Smith's situation, I don't think that he ever even coerced anyone. You know, people say, oh, well, he's standing. You're just like, well, do you think that Prince William coerced Meghan Markle to be his wife because he's a prince? You know, it's just someone who has like a standing like that. It just doesn't, you know, I think he's someone who saw, if even a girl seems afraid, and Lucy Walker says that much, like, we were too afraid to conceive. I think they were too afraid to do anything. Just like if there are men that exist today that aren't even religious, like that Shelley wasn't even a religious guy, could be like, you don't want to do anything,